Scotland. A land of stories whispered on the wind, carried by the waves that crash on the shore. City lights, country roads, misty mornings by the coast. Each photograph is a poem, each journey a diary of Scotland as we alone have seen it. There is no friend as loyal as a book or a song, and with every friendly face you meet, a new tale to be told, a new wonder to behold, a chance to be bold, to tread lightly and protect this place for future stories to come. So gather round and listen in. It's time for this story to begin. 2022 is Scotland's year of stories. Come and discover your own tale of Scotland.
Good evening, and thank you very much for coming this evening for some stories and music and song from Dumfries and Galloway. This is Wendy Stewart, and I'm Tom Pow, and we'd like to thank Transgressive North and the Scottish International Storytelling Festival and the Wild Goose Festival of Dumfries for making this happen. We'd like, if you'd like to show any appreciation at all, to save it for the end. Okay, thank you very much. Enjoy.
My poor old father went the same way. Him being a lobster man, he lived on the sea all his life, you know. And I remember he had taken ill and had been to the hospital and come back and had been in, recovered in his bed. And suddenly he just vanished. But anyway, the doctor was sent for, the doctor came down, and I was coming in. I'd be going out to the keep, what we call the keep box in the bay, to bring in some lobsters for the hotel at that time. And it was another nice day. The sea was a flat calm, like a silver mirror, you know, beautiful. And then I saw the narration here where the doctor had come down, the helpers had gone to find him and that kind of, and there's commotion at the door. I came in, brought the boat ashore, took the stuff out of the boat, and because the doctor had beaten into the house, I stayed outside, but I knew the father was going, you know. And it wasn't till some time after, he died right enough, but it wasn't till some time after that I had come in at the top of the tide, and this is the dead top of the tide, and the father had died at the same time as the tide had gone out. You know how the tide breaks to go back out? And I got the feeling in my body from then onwards that the tide had come and took him away, you know. He'd ebbed out with the tide because he was a seaman.
Do you know, I've watched that film about 30 times, 31 now, and each time I watch it, there's a sort of blur in what Ernie calls the narration. It's like 1 minute he's talking about his father being in hospital and he's ill, and then he's taken home and there's doctors around, and then Ernie talks about himself bringing his lobsters ashore, and just when he gets to the high tide, he's sure his father's vanished. He's gone. And he explains it by saying that because he was a lobster man, a seaman, the tide had taken his father back, and when he died, and this is an old custom, an ancient belief. But there's also that moment where he puts in this very pointed aside. I died right enough. And then he goes back into the story, and it's like there's a threshold where the event, the fact of it, and the mystery and the meaning of it coexist in this threshold when some balance is found between the different realities through which we make sense of our lives. And it's in this threshold, this fold of time, if you like, where we can meet with saints and mermaids and fairies. And it's out of this threshold that come stories and poems and songs. Like the story of St. Medon, there's a small kirk on the Mull of Galloway that's dedicated to St. Medon and to the gift that she could bestow. And just like pilgrims would go to the White Loch of Merton in Galloway, pilgrims like Robert the Bruce, to have their leprosy cured, so pilgrims would make their way to Kirkmedon to have their sight restored from the water from the sacred well there. This is the story of St. Medon. That Medon was beautiful, there was no doubt. Wherever she went, hearts were routed. But to her, these looks were but a costume she couldn't cast off. She saw her future not in the fancy of romantic play. It was in inner things her interest lay. Medon took a vow of chastity. Her life she bound to Christ. It was a sharp knife in the hearts of men. But one noble knight did not believe her. To quit his sight, she left Ireland for green Galloway. To the Rins she came to live in poverty. The knight followed. He would die or wed his heart's crusade. Pure Medon now fled to a rock in the sea. The rock became a boat. The boat she took 30 miles away. Still the knight followed, blindly obeying what his heart called for. He'd have been lost, but a crowing cock, to both their costs, told him the house where Medon lay. Shaken, she climbed, and she prayed as she climbed into a thorn tree. From there, she asked, "What in me excites your passion?" "Your face and eyes," he replied. In which case she sighed, then impaled her eyes on 2 sharp thorns and flung them at him. Desire was torn forever from that night. He looked at his feet where the eyes had rolled, lustrous jade now meet for ants. Horror-struck, he left a penitent. Medon washed her face, for a spring heaven sent gurgled from the dry earth. The rest of her days were lived in poverty and sanctity. Praise the Lord, sang Ninian. The proud cock half lived, but crowed no more, and sight became the gift St. Medon gave, so that all could suffer in equal measure, beauty and terror. At St. Medon's Cave, one autumn, many years ago, tracked by dark-eyed jurors, their tight knuckles white as snow, I rested between red palms of rock, marvelled at membrane musk and pulse of sea, left behind a veil of twinkling amulets, a votive for Ninian, Mother Earth, and the silence in me. For a saint, an offering. For a mermaid, a story. Why? Because it's lonely being a mermaid in the folk tales of Scotland. Selkies cavort all round the coastlines of Scotland and around their islands. I am a man upon the land and a selkie on the sea. Oh, they don't want for confidence, the Selkies.
I am a man upon the land, I am a silky on the sea.
Yeah, I've done that bit. A mermaid is a gentler creature, at least in this story. Although both Selkies and mermaids have to negotiate that threshold between sea and land, and for obvious reasons, the mermaids do it with less success. This story, it's important to bear in mind setting in time and in place. The Solway at its broadest can be flat calm, like a silver mirror, as Ernie would describe it. But it is always unpredictable with its fast-flowing tides and shifting sands. There's a sandbank called Barnhuri, just a few miles from the small port of Kipford. And many a ship has come to grief there if the captain has been careless or ill-informed, or if a storm happens to blow up. Oh yes, many's the ship that's come to grief in the sands of Barnhuri. 1753, the Betty. 1802, the Jenny. 1815, the Betty of Roxburgh. 1890, the Eliza and Jean. 1892, the Dispatch of Score. All hands lost, each one in the sands of Barnhuri. God bless them, every one. So, lives are as unpredictable in this time as the tides. Sailors can be lost, drowned, wrecked, far from home. They can be press-ganged into the navy and taken off to fight in Lord knows what distant sea. Ships can dock in a distant port, and one crewman can bring aboard a pestilence that kills the whole crew. And sailors can design a whole new life for themselves with new exotic lovers, leaving behind a world of ignorance and pain and loss and an emptiness almost too great to bear. And it's in this uncertain world that a mermaid and a seaman fall in love. Now this is, I understand, very unlikely seeming, and how could that courting be? Well, quite simple, really. In the harbour at Kipford, when no one, they were blind to everybody's sight, the mermaid stayed in the water, her eyes fixed on the seaman, while the seaman shifted his sacks and his crates on board boat, pretending she was not looking at him, until he turned and their eyes locked. And in that locking came a stirring of their feelings, and their fate was set. Yes, sometimes it does only take that look, that meaningful glance, for the spark of desire to come, and from that desire, love. And so it was with them. And what did he see in her? Her fathomless green eyes, her long celandine hair, the white cups of her breasts as she span in the water for him, the silver flash of her tail. And more perhaps than any of these was a world to which he did not have access, beset as he always was with responsibilities for his family, for his wife and his children, and always having to provide with winter threatening its onset. And what did she see in him? His broad, honest face, the thick ponytail down his neck, the way his muscles rippled as he shifted these sacks about, the flash of his smile. And for her, more than anything, a world she could only try to imagine, a world of community and of support, the world of the land. And they looked at each other with such intensity and depth that from then on they would never need language to explain their feelings to each other. So that's the seed and the spark of their love. But what gives the story shape are two wrecks. The first wreck she was almost ready for. The winds had blown up, and she saw his ship, knowing it was his, sailing and moving unsteadily in the rough waters of the Solway, until a fierce gust of wind blew it onto the sandbank of Barhuri, and it tipped, and as the water flowed in, the drowned, the flailing seamen came out along with broken crates and casks. And the mermaid was in the water quickly, swimming furiously towards the wreck, past the bodies of the drowned and the drowning, until she saw the body of her lover, and she latched an arm around him and swam with him back to her cave, which was accessible because the tide was high. And in that cave, she tended him lovingly, with feeding him mussels and whelks, feeding him and loving him until he'd recovered enough to return home. But oh, though he loved his wife and children, still, what a wrench it was to leave the compass of these fathomless green eyes. But when he returned home, his appearance was greeted with such joy that no one really questioned the tale he span of the days he'd lost finding his way back along the coast from where the sea had left him. that summer, that spring and summer, he took to wandering back to her cave in the hope that he might catch her there. And often he did. And they lay together, him wondering, marvelling at the beauty of her strange body. And he tended her with the love and tenderness with which she had bestowed on him. And while he was there, with her, his senses seemed to be at an intensity he'd never known before. The sea smelled like the sea smells to a child as it comes over the hill and sees and smells the sea for the first time. And flowers that had been odorless for him, sea pinks, suddenly smelt rich and deep. And when he returned home, he would look at his wife with his broad, most honest seeming face. And she would look back at him, smile slightly, and he would go away convinced that she accepted the reasons for his absences. But they both must have known that what attracts you to someone, what is you find sometimes most attractive in someone, can be what makes the relationship impossible. And they must have known that the idyll could not last. But oh, these feelings can bring such a sweetness to the moments you share. So, to the second wreck. And this one, she wasn't prepared for. He'd been away so long, so very long, and she had no idea where. Had he gone to the place from where the geese return? Had he gone where the swifts go? There was no way of knowing. He'd gone certainly very far. The crew had hoped in this voyage that they would buy enough things to sell at home, exotic things that would last them, earn enough money to last them through the coming winter. And she was not prepared for the fierceness of an early October storm. So when the wind got up, she was not as prepared as for the first storm. And she saw the ship come unsteadily and blow onto the sands of Barnhuri and Tip, and the water flow in, and the men flailing fall out, and she wondered perhaps this is the boat he is on, and she swam furiously out to the wreck. But none of the bodies drowned or the drowning that the waves butted against her was him. 3 times she swam round the wreck before she swam back to her cave. And she still had a feeling of foreboding, but she hoped, she really truly hoped that he had not been on this ship. The next morning, she looked from her cave down onto the Solway, flat calm, like a silver mirror. But in the place where the high tide had been and had withdrawn, she noticed a figure in the sand curled around itself, as if trying to protect its last breath. And she knew that it was him. And she manoeuvred herself down from the rock and across the sand till she was lying next to him. She blew gently on his face. She placed a webbed hand on his heart, and with the other hand she rubbed herbs she had gathered into his eyes. And his eyes opened, and he took 2 or 3 halting breaths and looked up at her and smiled. And when his breath had steadied, he raised himself up onto his shoulder and he pointed to his home. And she looked down at him with a look of great sadness, but tinged with a strange joy. And she shook her head. And he knew at that moment that the life that she had given him was not for the life of the land, and that he would never hold his children again. And this is where there's a slip in the narration, a slip, a snag, and it's as if there's a threshold in which the 2 stories are existing side by side, because he died right enough, he drowned. And 2 days later he was buried in the small graveyard by the kirk and mourned too. But back the 2 days earlier, the mermaid smoothed the hair from his forehead. And they smiled at each other, and he fully accepted how their fates had been twinned, and the life that he was going to have to live now. And the pair of them slipped, moved into a deep channel in the Ceilidh, and they swam out together into the sea, where he could live the life of freedom for which he had longed. Well, it's not long before his wife remarries. A carpenter this time. A homebody who never liked to move far from the house. But each Easter, her first husband returns to see how their children are growing. And she welcomes his presence warmly. For she has always known that something of him would live on. Because of course, the Mermaid of Barnhuri has been his wife's story all along. A story that she tells to herself often to ensure there is no bitterness she feels over his deceptions and his death, and to convince herself there is no division between the worlds of sea and of earth and her own loving heart.
All the seas gone dry, my dear, and all the seas gone dry. I will love thee still, my dear. I will love thee still.
I remember it's a beautiful sunshine day, really nice day. And I was just sitting there, just idly wandering along with the old mine, you know, it was going like blazes, and drifted back homeward. All of a sudden I was sitting there, this damned cold shiver came. But before the shiver came along was the panoramic view of the village itself. I thought, oh hell, what's going on here? Because being a superstitious person, you thought, oh, this has to be a warning of some kind, you know.
There's a special song within my family that we kept the song sacred. So we worshipped this song, my family did, and it's the main song within my family's culture. Now as I roved out one summer's morn, among lofty hills, moorland and mountain, it was there I spied a lovely maid, whilst I with others was out a-hunting. No shoes nor stockings did she wear, neither had she hat, nor had she feathers, but her golden locks aye in her ringlets fell.
Yes, it's been walked over by all sorts of peoples in its time. Probably there are little remains of Phoenician galleys lying outside there on the screens, as well as Roman ships and Viking ships and quite a lot of others.
So we lifted the top off where the garden was, and underneath, about a foot under the ground, we found bodies, about 3 or 4 bodies in the ground, you know. At the end of the day, we lifted about 700 bodies, dead bodies, before we got right down through to the 3rd century. And on the way down, we met up with the poor old Vikings and different evidence like that, you know, on the way down.
There are certainly presences even in an old house like this. Not threatening or not materialising, but presences you're aware of.
But there are some places where you get a feeling that there is a bit of haunted. There's no money in the world would take me down that harbour in the dark hours or the wee, you know, at midnight.
I was with my granduncle and we stopped at a house on the glen called Cooney. And I went into the byre because a bitch, working dog, had puppies and I wanted to see the puppies. And all of a sudden, there was a shadow cast over the doorway and I looked up and there on the rafters on a spar there was a strange creature. I could not make out, was it a human being or was it some kind of animal? My vision cleared a wee bit and I saw the gnarled face of an old person sitting on this rafter and speaking to me in a language I didn't understand. Strangely enough, the bitch put her ears back and the hairs on the back of her stood up, but I felt no fear. What draws me back is intimations of mortality. I get comfort from these old things that I heard when I was a wee boy, because they, for a short while at least, they remove me from the futility of existence, if you like.
There's certain names that we won't say in the morning before 12 o'clock because it's unlucky and we don't say them. But we've got made up other names for them. Like, I said it, but I said it after 12 o'clock today. Pig, we'll not say pig in the mornings. We say gruffy. We can't what we mean. We'll not say snake in the morning. We say a wriggly. We'll not say monkey in the morning. And we'll not say RAT in the morning.
Called things on board a boat, they called things by different names. Rats were long tails, and cats were scratchers, and what they called the revenue officers was something else entirely. Because we have such a large population of newcomers, so much of this has just been lost.
There are thousands of songs in my background that have died and I don't know about. You know, it's like the millions of dead souls that are floating around as we speak just now, they just don't exist anymore when the song dies.
Nian shin a chi de vurain ganduk mi mogul hopuloch perlum hina oit nu krenu krunyak vi shin left.
Seen the best of this world. I say, Dad, he's seen the best of this world. There is a lot of things he changed in my life. My oldest sister died at 48, my other sister died at 56, my brother died at 70. So I've lived longer. I have the ache nor pain, just my legs are no gone the way I want them. So I hope I can finish my days with yes. As far as the old folk, they're nearly all gone now, the old people that I knew and grew up with. This is God's waiting room as far as I'm concerned, you know. For all the old people, that's all it is now.
It was said to be the gift that nobody wanted because you would have an experience or a vision or an encounter of something that hadn't yet happened, but you were never really given to see it in the actual way that it was going to happen. It could be a sound or a smell or it could be something, and it was usually a premonition of death.
According to my own mother, her father, Norman, he had second sight, certainly. I mean, he foresaw his own death. He saw himself going down with the ship, and he got out after an afternoon's rest and said to his wife, my granny, well, Anak, I'm not going to return this trip. Oh, shit, what are you talking about? No, he said, I'm going down with the ship. Really quite cold-blooded about the whole thing. And it came to pass. A German U-boat shot the ship and he went down with it.
It's my life. It's my life completely and utterly, and I'm so afraid that when I go, well, I know when I go, my culture's gone.
It expresses just such a depth of feeling and sense of loss of something that was exquisitely wonderful. In this case, a sweetheart. But it could be also a sense of loss of something else. And that sense of loss, when words fail, only a song can express it. I wouldn't want to think that it was all lament. I think there's still fight in there. And there's still optimism in there.
Oh, hovan, 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 iri, smor, mo, volat, smor.
And everybody sees a ghost in a different way. I see a ghost as a helper, you know, because my folk comes to me and they help me because I'm singing their songs, I'm telling my father's stories, and I believe that when I'm telling the story, my father's there.
They would think about it and maybe think about all of the things that that person meant to them in life, including the values that that person had and held, realising that it wasn't a complete severance afterwards, but that something did continue. Not just the values, but the traditions as well.
Synchronicity is not everything, and you still, I think the heart of that film still came over strongly. And one of the things in the film, these portraits, these filmed portraits, reminded me very much of the lines of Alistair Reid's great poem, Weathering. Alistair Reid, of course, who was born and spent his childhood in Whithorn, watching in the film, and the lines from Weathering are, "From wearing a face all this time, I am made aware of the maps faces are, the inside wear and tear. I take to faces that have come far." And Alistair, as a writer, travelled the world and lived in many different places. He had come far and had a face that had come far. But the faces in that film have also come far in terms of time and experience. Resilience, acceptance of isolation and loss is etched in them, as I imagine it would have been in the faces of the old Galloway hill shepherds. It said they only came down from the hills for market or to find for themselves a wife. And it's also said that in these areas, the hills of Galloway, Gaelic lasted far longer than was once thought. And that the first ordnance survey men coming to that area, seeking names for various pieces of geography, landscape features, they asked the old Galloway hill shepherds, and they gave them the filthiest names they could think of, but in Gaelic. And that the maps were all printed before it was discovered. This is truly a Galloway tale. He told the map men anything, but in Gaelic. That stretch of bog, old woman's fanny. The small rise, Mary's tit. The maps were all printed before he was rumbled. An ageing hill shepherd, what did he want of the outside world? Provisions, perhaps? Tools? A wife? Each market day for 2 years he wooed her, his fistfuls of violets bound up with wool, till drunk as a lord, after the market, after the wedding, he took her back over the bald hills, the gurgling sounding places. Years later, children were seen, fetching water from dark pools, cupping curlew's eggs. It said they fixed you with eyes sharp as kestrels, hovered momentarily and were gone, behind a green ruff around the thick-walled bothy. A slum in the heather, so some saw it, black pans lying unscoured, ropes of washing rotting in damp piles. After she died, he carried her over the hills, over the burns, on his back. And at her graveside in the rain, he mourned on alone, while in the pub they put on grim cartographer faces and muttered that the loneliness of earth would suit her. This next story moves inland from the coast and down from the hills. We're in a softer landscape of inner Galloway, in Nithsdale, really. And one of the lines in the film, I think it's Ernie who says, you know, we're all in God's waiting room. Well, some of us are closer to our final appointment than others, but I think we're all can be interested in what might happen next. And that's something of what this story's about. So anyway, what happens is there's a young woman, Eliza, and she's in her cottage, she's mending, sewing, and her child, her young boy, is playing on the hearthside. And Eliza's somebody aware of presence in the room, and it's nothing that bothers her because, of course, people dropped into in country places unannounced, but she turns and it's a woman in a long green dress, much the same age as Eliza herself. They could be sisters, and she's carrying a child, a boy as well. And the woman in green says, "Could you look after my child for an hour or so? There are things I must be doing." And Eliza is about to readily accept, because childcare is often shared as well. But she offers her an enticement almost. She said, "Do this for me and I will give you a gift of great worth." Eliza, "Oh, nothing. And so the woman in green puts her child down beside Eliza's child, and off she goes. Well, she doesn't return within an hour. And she doesn't return within the next hour, or the hour after that, or in fact, overnight. But when Eliza opens her cottage door the next morning, there on the flagstone are a small group of honey cakes and a flask of milk. Well, she takes it in gratefully. But the next day there's still no woman in green. But there is, on the flagstone, the honey cakes and the milk. So Eliza takes to emptying the flask and putting it out overnight, and each morning there, the honey cakes and the fresh milk. And this carries on for several weeks. No return of the woman in green. And Eliza's beginning to think, it's almost easier looking after two children because they entertain each other and let Eliza get going about her work. But then she begins to be concerned because children at that age, they grow quickly and they're growing out of their clothes are getting worn. And the minute she thinks that, the next day she opens the door, and there on the flagstone beside the honey cakes and the milk are two sets of new clothing, one for each of the boys. So some more time passes until one evening Eliza is settling the boys in their box bed when she's aware again of a presence behind her, and she turns, and it is indeed the woman in green. The woman in green says, "I've come for my child," and Eliza says, "It is your right. He is your child, but I've come to love him almost as my own." The woman in green pays no attention, takes Eliza's by the elbow and says, "The children will be asleep soon. Come, let me give you my gift." And they walk out of the cottage and they start walking up the field. And halfway up the field, Eliza notices a ripple in the turf. And then the turf seems of itself to lift up, to tear up. And it becomes a door through which they walk into an earth chamber. And once they're in there, the woman in green takes Eliza by the chin, and with a small glass vial she puts 3 drops into her left eye. She says, "Look." And Eliza looks, and she is standing on the edge of a field, and it is harvest time. And look, there's the old grey tractor. The old grey tractor that had that contraption that used to cut the corn and bind it into sheaves and drop them off at the side. And they're following the tractor, making the sheaves into stooks for some of the old neighbours that used to come and help during harvest time. And there's old Sandy. Old Sandy who had the shakes since the war. And he's still helping too. Old Sandy who will fall into the midden and drown. And there helping beside him is his wife Nancy, who after Sandy dies will take to drink and her voice become hoarse and scratched and worn. Though this time, the time that Eliza's watching now, Nancy can still hold a tune.
Oh, my love's like a red rose that's newly sprung into bloom. Oh, my love's like a melody that's sweetly played in tune.
And there she sees, coming into the field, it's herself. And she's carrying sandwiches wrapped in a cloth, and flasks of hot, sweet, milky tea for people helping in the harvest. And then just behind her runs, oh, it's Willie. And he takes a handful of straw and he's put it down her back and he's rubbing it, and then he runs off laughing. Oh, Willie, Willie, Willie. Even at 12 she should have known he would never last as a husband, far less as a father. And yet, to see him now makes her smile.
As fair art thou, my bonny lassie, deep in the lullaby, and I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 miles.
And she can smell the salt sweat of the day, and she can feel the roughness of the straw on her back, on her skin, even although she knows that in this fold of time, this is just the living and the dead come together in a dream of home. And the scene fades. And the woman in green says, there is something else you must see, but there is something in the edge of her voice. And Eliza also wants to hold on to the warmth, the joy that this scene has brought her. She says, no, I don't want to. But the woman in green takes her by the chin more roughly this time. And out of the glass vial, she drops 3 drops into her right eye and says, look. And Eliza opens her eyes and she sees the lines of a landscape she knows well, and she shuts her eyes quickly again. She wants to remember that landscape, the gentle sloping hills of Galloway. Oh, on a summer evening, the light would slant in so sweetly, so heavenly, and it always caught at her heart. Open your eyes, the woman in green commands, and Eliza looks, and it is indeed the lines of a landscape she knows well. But it is scarred and burnt and dark. Nothing grows on it. And above the woods where she used to play, there is a pall of smoke. And worst of all is the silence. Oh, how she would love to hear the sound of geese. But nothing, no sound at all. And then in from the side comes a small child, scrawny, barefoot, bent. And the child is about to turn. And Eliza said, no, please, no, no more. And the scene fades. And she turns to the woman in green and she says, oh, Spirit, please tell. Are these the shadows of things that will be? Or are these the shadows of things that may be only? And the woman in green looks at her and says, if enough eyes can be made to see, then such things may not come to be. And she takes Eliza by the elbow and she leads her out of the chamber, and the turf falls back, and she takes her back to her cottage and takes her child and leaves. And for some time after that, Eliza is able to see the fairies as they go about their business at the front of her cottage. Till once she plucks up enough courage to call out to one. And he rushes up to her and he takes her face roughly between his hands, and he blows on both her eyes. And she never sees a fairy again. So anyway, what happens is,
all seas can dry my ear, and rocks melt with the sun. I will love thee still, my dear, while sands of time shall run.
Alistair Reid was drawn all his life to the agricultural round of Whithorn that had shaped his imagination as a child. And it was that sense of the agricultural round that drew him to Samana, an isolated part of the Dominican Republic, where he had a sort of shelter. It was like a lean-to built, a sophisticated lean-to, but still a lean-to looking out onto the sea. You didn't need an awful lot there in the sun and the warmth. And Alistair, when he was there, set up a relationship with a couple of campesinos, a couple of fishermen, Juan and Pepe. And the arrangement was that Juan and Pepe would provide Alistair with all the fish that he wanted. And in return, when Alistair was out in the outside world, so to speak, he would bring them back fishing tackle and things that they needed for their fishing. And Alistair was always very careful to observe a sort of etiquette about the threshold, between the threshold of the two worlds, the two cultures. But one day he returned to his place, and he found Juan and Pepe were poring over a picture in a catalogue that Alistair had. And it was a picture of a rowing machine. And they were looking at this rowing machine. Alejandro, ¿qué es esto? What is this? And Alistair said, it's a rowing machine. Imagina remar, a rowing machine. They looked at each other and said, oh, the hardest thing we do is have to row out into the bay before we can put our nets out. And this is so hard, but if we had a rowing machine, so they say, Alejandro, ¿cuánto cuesta? How much is this rowing machine? So Alistair translated the dollars into, so many thousand pesetas. Oh, look at each other. Oh, we can't row, but very expensive, but this would be worth it. This would save all the effort that we have rowing out into the bay to put over our nets. And Alistair thinks, oh, wait a minute, this has gone far enough. So he said, wait, Juan Pepe, with this rowing machine, there's no sea. Look at each other. He said, and there's no boat. No boats. Look at each other. And they say, well, Alejandro, where do people row? Where do people row? In sus casas, in their houses. In their houses. They look at each other. They say, you mean, Alejandro, you mean the hardest thing that we do, rowing out into the bay to put out our nets and people row in their houses and go nowhere? They say, yeah. Alejandro, ¿por qué? Why? And Alistair looks at them and says, for exercise. They look at him and say, And at times like that, they used to talk about El Gran Mundo. And often they would say, after an occasion like that, oh, El Gran Mundo must be mad. And in Dumfries and Galloway, we have experienced as well the madness of El Gran Mundo. We've experienced the violence of the rough wooing, of the killing times. In the Second World War, we had Norwegians seeking safety living in Dumfries. We've had Lockerbie. And now, because of the madness of El Gran Mundo, we have Ukrainians living among us. But the film showed that death and memory live in the house of time. And so too does El Gran Mundo. And the images there, the images of rusting farm implements, of rotting old boats, of worn stone, things that once had a human presence have another meaning now. And we feel that that meaning is best captured to us in an epitaph collected from an old gravestone by William McMath, the great 19th century folklore and folk song collector who was born and raised in Galloway. And the epitaph has been set to music by Ali Burns. And it's with this that we would like to end our evening. I'm going to say the epitaph. It's only 4 lines. Wendy's going to sing it. And then we'd be very, very happy if we could all sing it together a couple of times. Oh, the earth says to the earth, all shall be ours. All shall be ours. All of your castles and all of your towers, all shall be ours. All shall be